A Heart's Revolution by Julian Rhodes. The winter of 1812 descended upon St. Petersburg like a sleeping giant, its crystalline breath coating the Nevsky Prospect in a blanket of pristine snow. Countess Elena Mikhailovna Vorontsova stood at her bedroom window, watching merchant sleighs glide past the iron gates of her family's townhouse. At 20 years old, she had already refused 3 suitors deemed suitable by her father, earning herself a reputation as either fiercely independent or impossibly stubborn, depending on whom one asked. Elena's delicate fingers traced frost patterns on the windowpane as she contemplated her latest act of defiance. That morning she had dismissed yet another nobleman's advances, this time the wealthy but dull Prince Dmitri Volkov, who had spent their entire meeting discussing his extensive collection of hunting trophies. Yelenka, her mother's voice carried from the doorway, using the pet name that Elena had long since outgrown. "You cannot continue this way. Your father's patience wears thin." Elena turned, her emerald silk dress rustling with the movement. "Mama, surely you don't expect me to marry a man who speaks more fondly of his stuffed bears than he does of literature or music." Countess Voronssova's face softened as she approached her daughter. "My dear, we cannot all marry poets. Sometimes practicality must prevail." "I don't seek a poet," Elena replied, though her heart whispered otherwise. "I seek a man with a soul." Little did Elena know that fate had already set in motion events that would challenge her convictions about both practicality and passion. That very evening, her world would collide with that of Major Alexander Razumovsky, a decorated officer freshly returned from the front lines of Napoleon's invasion. The occasion was Countess Buzova's winter ball, an event that drew the cream of St. Petersburg society. Elena had initially pleaded illness to avoid attendance, but her father's stern insistence had prevailed. Now, as she descended the grand staircase of the Buzov mansion, she silently thanked whatever force had changed her mind. The ballroom sparkled with hundreds of candles reflected in gilt mirrors, creating an atmosphere of ethereal splendor. Ladies in their finest silks and velvets swirled across the parquet floor, their jewels catching the light like stars fallen to earth. Yet it was not the opulent setting that caught Elena's breath. It was the tall figure standing by the French windows, his military uniform setting him apart from the peacocking nobles in their elaborate civilian dress. Major Razumovsky cut a striking figure, his posture speaking of battlefield command rather than ballroom pleasantries. A thin scar traced his left temple, barely visible unless one knew to look for it. His dark hair was swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes, when they met Elena's across the room, held depths that spoke of experiences far beyond the sheltered world of the capital's social scene. Their first dance was a mazurka, and Elena found herself grateful for the lively steps that helped disguise her racing heart. "You dance surprisingly well for a military man, Major," she observed, allowing a hint of challenge to color her tone. "And you lead surprisingly well for a lady, Countess," he returned with a slight smile that transformed his serious countenance. "Though perhaps I shouldn't be surprised, given your reputation." Elena's step nearly faltered. "My reputation?" "For having excellent judgment in matters of the heart," he clarified. 3 rejected suitors, I hear, each more qualified than the last on paper, yet each lacking something essential. You seem well informed about my personal affairs." "St. Petersburg thrives on such intelligence," Alexander replied, "though I prefer to gather my own information firsthand." As they turned through the figure of the dance, Elena studied his face. "And what intelligence do you gather now, Major?" "That rumors do you no justice, Countess. They speak of your beauty but not your wit, of your rebellions but not their cause." The dance ended too soon, but it marked only the beginning. Throughout the evening, Elena found herself drawn into Alexander's orbit again and again. Between dances, they discovered shared passions for poetry and music. He had studied at Moscow University before answering the call to arms. His knowledge of literature was extensive, but it was the way he spoke about it that captivated Elena. He didn't simply recite verses, he understood their heart. "Tell me of the war," she requested during a quiet moment in the conservatory, where they had escaped the ball's heat and noise. Alexander's expression grew distant. "It's not a subject for such an evening." "I'm not asking for tales of glory or horror," Elena clarified. "I want to understand what drives a man of letters to become a man of war." He was silent for a long moment, considering. "Duty, at first," he finally said. "Then something more. When you see your homeland threatened, when you watch peasants and princes alike take up arms to defend their soil, you understand that some things transcend the boundaries we create in peacetime. Beauty can exist even in darkness, Countess. The first have seen it in the courage of common soldiers, in the mercy of enemies, in the small acts of humanity that persist even in war's shadow. Elena found herself moved not just by his words but by the emotion behind them. Here was a man who had seen the worst of humanity, yet retained his ability to see the best. "And now that you've returned," she asked softly. "Now I must learn to live in peace again," he answered with a slight smile. "Though I'm finding it has challenges of its own." Their courtship, when it began in earnest, raised eyebrows throughout society. The Vorontsovs, while initially skeptical of a mere major who had more scars than estates, were gradually won over by Alexander's evident intelligence and honorable character. Elena's father, after a long private conversation with the young officer, emerged with unexpected approval. Yet it was not all smooth sailing. Elena's former suitors had powerful connections, and whispers began to circulate about Alexander's family background, suggesting hidden scandals and financial improprieties. Elena found her own reputation once again under attack, with some suggesting she had lowered herself by entertaining the attentions of a mere soldier. It came to a head at Princess Gagarina's spring soiree, where Elena overheard two ladies discussing her situation in deliberately carrying voices. "Such a shame," one said, fan-fluttering. "The Vorontsov girl had such prospects. Now she'll be lucky if she doesn't end up in some provincial garrison town, playing hostess to rough officers' wives." Elena felt her cheeks burn, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the gossip. "I've found," Alexander said clearly, having approached unnoticed, "that those who speak most confidently of military life often know the least about it." He offered his arm to Elena. "Countess, I believe you promised me this dance." As they took their places in the quadrille, Elena fought to control her emotions. "They'll never accept us," she said quietly. "Do you care?" Alexander's question was gentle but direct. Elena looked up at him, really looked, seeing past the uniform to the man who had awakened her heart to possibilities she'd never imagined. "No," she realized, "I don't." "Then let them talk. We've both faced worse opposition." The following weeks brought more challenges. Napoleon's armies might have been driven from Russian soil, but the war's aftermath still echoed through society. Alexander was called back to his regiment several times, each departure testing their growing bond. Elena found herself growing stronger in his absences, taking an active role in organizing aid for wounded soldiers and war widows. Their love deepened not in spite of these challenges but because of them. Every letter exchanged, every reunion, every shared moment of understanding added another layer to their connection. Alexander's military duties took him away, but they also revealed his dedication to causes greater than himself. Elena's social battle showed him her courage and conviction. Their wedding, when it finally took place in the late spring of 1813, was a quieter affair than might have been expected for a Vorontsov daughter. The ceremony was held in the family's private chapel with only close family and true friends in attendance. Elena wore a gown of ivory silk, simple by the standards of the day but elegant in its restraint. Alexander, in his dress uniform, looked at her as though she were the only person in the world. The reception that followed proved that love could indeed conquer social prejudice. Even those who had once whispered behind their fans found themselves charmed by the evident devotion between the newlyweds. When Alexander and Elena opened the dancing, their waltz was not just a dance but a declaration. Here were two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for. As they moved across the floor, Elena remembered their first dance at the Buzov ball. "You're still leading surprisingly well for a military man," she teased. "And you're still following surprisingly well for a revolutionary," he returned with a smile that was only for her. "Perhaps we've both learned something about when to lead and when to follow." Later that evening, as they stood together on the balcony of their new home, watching the summer sunset paint the Neva River in shades of gold and pink, Elena felt a profound sense of rightness. The path to this moment had not been easy, but every step had led them exactly where they were meant to be. "Do you remember," Alexander asked, his arm around her waist, "when you told me you were seeking a man with a soul?" Elena smiled, leaning into his embrace. "And instead I found a man with both a soul and a sword. They're not so different, really," he mused. "Both require care, dedication, and the courage to use them wisely. And both," Elena added, "are worthless without love to guide them." The sun dipped below the horizon, but its warmth lingered in the air around them. In the distance, church bells rang the evening hour, their sound carrying across the city that had witnessed their love story unfold. Behind them, music and laughter spilled from the reception rooms, but Alexander and Elena remained on their balcony, content in each other's company and in the knowledge that they had found, in each other, something both practical and passionate, a love that could weather any storm, whether it came from the battlefield or the ballroom. The years would bring their share of challenges, more wars, social changes, the continuous evolution of Russian society. But Elena and Alexander faced them together, their love growing stronger with each passing season. They had discovered that true romance wasn't found in grand gestures or social expectations, but in the quiet moments of understanding, in shared values, and in the courage to choose love over convention. Their story became something of a legend in St. Petersburg society, whispered about in drawing rooms and ballrooms, not as a scandal anymore, but as proof that true love could transcend social boundaries and survive life's greatest challenges. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures of the heart begin with a simple dance, and the courage to look beyond the surface to find the soul within.